I never thought a single text could make my heart skip like this. Sitting in my corner office on the 34th floor, the sunlight glinting off the glass walls, I felt an odd mix of pride and apprehension. My silk blouse felt smooth under my fingers, my coffee still warm beside my laptop, but it wasn't the luxury or the quiet hum of the city that had my attention. It was the name flashing on my phone. David Reynolds. David Reynolds. My first boss. The one who'd laughed when I struggled to even answer a client call without stammering. The one who whispered to his colleagues about how she'd never make it in front of me, as if I couldn't hear. The message was simple, almost casual. Can we meet tomorrow? I need your help with a client pitch. Urgent. I took a deep breath, watching the sunlight bend across the sleek mahogany desk, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly. Part of me wanted to smile. No, more than that, a quiet, victorious smile. But beneath that, I felt the old sting, the memory of being underestimated, dismissed, and laughed at. I leaned back, letting my thoughts wander. How ironic it was that after all those years of self-doubt, the very people who mocked my first steps were now seeking my guidance. I could almost hear the echo of their laughter in the office's polished walls. Only this time, the power had shifted. The thought made my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression calm, composed, professional. Because soon, they would realize just how far I had come. I still remember the cramped office, the peeling beige walls, and the faint smell of burnt coffee that seemed to linger everywhere. I was 22, fresh out of college, eager and terrified in equal measure. My first job at Reynolds and Company was supposed to be a stepping stone, a chance to prove myself, but it quickly became a stage where my mistakes were spotlighted. Seriously, Emily, how do you even manage to get this wrong? David had said once, leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. His laughter filled the small office, joined by the quiet snickers of my coworkers. My hands had trembled as I handed over the report, my face hot, my voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to shrink into the chair and disappear. The sting of that moment stayed with me, but it wasn't the only challenge. My parents didn't exactly understand my ambitions either. "Why don't you just take a safer job, Emily?" my father had said. "Something respectable." Their words were well-meaning but heavy, like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. I felt small, trapped between family expectations and my own desperate desire to prove that I could be more than what they thought. Then there was my grandmother. I remember her hands, wrinkled, warm, steady, holding mine as she whispered, "Don't let their laughter define you. Let it push you to rise." She pressed a small, silver bracelet into my palm, simple but elegant, a symbol of belief in me when the world seemed to doubt everything I was capable of. I clutched that bracelet every morning as I left my apartment, and I let it remind me, resilience isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and relentless. That evening, after another day of awkward mistakes and whispered critiques, I sat alone in my tiny apartment, staring at the city lights through the dusty window. The lump in my throat wouldn't go away, and my hands shook as I scribbled plans into a worn notebook, ideas, dreams, ways to escape the ridicule, to carve out my own path. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I had made my decision. I would work harder, learn faster, and rise higher. No one would laugh at me forever, not David, not my parents, not anyone. And I would do it my way. Starting over wasn't glamorous. My first apartment was tiny, the rent barely manageable on my modest paycheck. I spent nights hunched over my laptop, a single desk lamp casting shadows across stacks of notebooks, filled with strategies, goals, and client pitches I dreamed of landing one day. Each keystroke, each phone call, each rejection felt like a test I had to pass quietly, without anyone noticing how close I sometimes came to giving up. It was during one of those late nights that I met Margaret Collins, a senior consultant who quickly became my mentor. She saw potential where others only saw mistakes. "Emily," she said one evening, "you're thinking too small. Stop letting fear dictate what you can do. You have talent, use it." That was the spark I needed. With her guidance, I began to refine my approach, learn the nuances of negotiation, client management, and project strategy. She introduced me to networks I would never have reached on my own, always reminding me that success isn't given, it's earned, quietly, persistently. The early wins were small but monumental to me. My first client, an independent boutique looking for branding advice, was hesitant and frankly, so was I. But I poured every ounce of energy into the proposal, staying up until 2 a.m. fine-tuning every detail. When they signed the contract, I felt a thrill I had never known. That single win fueled me for the long nights ahead. I kept a low profile about my progress. My family received generic updates. Work's going well, learning a lot. Only Margaret knew the truth, that I was slowly building a consultancy from scratch, gaining clients, earning trust, and proving to myself every day that I could stand on my own. There were moments of doubt, of course. Sometimes I imagined David's mocking face or the disappointed sighs of my parents. Sometimes I thought, what if I fail? What if I'm just not enough? But then I would glance at the silver bracelet my grandmother had given me, resting against my wrist, and the anxiety would melt into determination. I kept moving forward. Years passed in a blur of effort, lessons, and growth. I learned to trust my instincts, negotiate contracts, and even outmaneuver skeptics without arrogance. I celebrated small milestones privately. My first profitable project, my first team hire, my first office space with sunlight streaming in, a space that felt like my own little kingdom. Every achievement was a quiet victory over those who had doubted me at the very start. By the time I was ready to expand my services to larger clients, I had amassed a portfolio that spoke for itself. My independence was no longer fragile, it was formidable. And yet, I remained invisible to the very people who had laughed at me, allowing my success to grow under the radar, like a carefully tended garden, until it was ready to bloom. The knock on the door was polite, but the energy in the room shifted the moment I saw them. David Reynolds and a few of my former colleagues, standing there with the same smug confidence they'd worn when I was 22. They had expected a timid, inexperienced Emily, probably scrambling to take notes or beg for guidance. What they didn't expect was me, confident, poised, and entirely in control. I gestured for them to sit in my office chairs, the soft leather warm beneath their hands. My office had a commanding view of the city skyline, sunlight glinting off the sleek glass desk, modern art lining the walls, and a few personal touches, my grandmother's silver bracelet displayed in a small, elegant frame, a subtle nod to the journey that had brought me here. I waited. Let them take it in. Let the realization dawn slowly. They glanced around, whispered to each other, their smiles fading as their eyes followed the details of my world. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with industry reports, awards, and framed testimonials from major clients. The corner conference table held portfolios and proposals from Fortune 500 companies, names that once seemed unreachable. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm, measured, and undeniably steady. I understand you're looking for guidance on a client pitch, I began. That's fortunate, because I am now the CEO of my own consultancy. And this particular client? They're under my contract. The room froze. David's jaw tightened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. The colleagues shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, as if trying to reconcile the Emily they had laughed at with the woman standing before them. I remember my first day here. I continued, letting a quiet smile play on my lips. I was eager, inexperienced, and yes, perhaps I made mistakes. You laughed. You doubted me. You whispered about how I'd never make it, and that was a powerful motivator. David opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked around, realizing that every element of my office, every achievement, and every client success was a testament to the very growth he had once mocked. I've built my career quietly, without fanfare, learning, struggling, and eventually thriving, I said, my tone softening just enough to let them feel the weight of the journey. And now, ironically, I am the person you must rely on to secure the very client you thought I'd never impress. I let the statement hang in the air, watching the mixture of shame, astonishment, and reluctant respect flicker across their faces. Their laughter at my first job had been a cruel sound, one I replayed in my mind countless times. But today, the echo had changed. It was no longer humiliation. It was the quiet triumph of perseverance, skill, and resilience. For a moment, the room was silent except for the distant hum of traffic below. I could almost feel their old assumptions unraveling, the invisible threads of their underestimations snapping one by one. I waited, letting the suspense stretch, savoring the moment of reversal, not in spite, but in quiet, undeniable achievement. Then I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the polished desk. So, shall we discuss how we move forward together? My calm composure contrasted sharply with the tension now radiating from them. This wasn't revenge. This was power earned and displayed, without bitterness, just clarity, just truth. And as they nodded, still recovering from the shock, I realized something. The laughter of the past had been a gift. Not because it hurt, but because it pushed me to prove, in the most undeniable way possible, that I could not be underestimated again. I leaned back in my chair, letting the authority of the room settle comfortably around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very people who had mocked my first job were now here, dependent on me. I could feel the shift, tangible, almost electric. The tables had turned, but unlike the old Emily, this Emily knew the value of balance, strength tempered with wisdom. Before we move forward, I said, voice steady but firm, there are a few things you need to understand. I watched David's eyes narrow slightly, curiosity and apprehension mingling. I'm willing to help, but it's not about you proving your worth to me. It's about changing the way you approach your work, your people, and even yourselves. I set out conditions for each of them, my words deliberate, unhurried. For David, you must acknowledge your past mistakes and commit to mentoring rather than mocking those under your supervision. You will approach clients with respect and humility, not arrogance. His jaw tightened, but I could see a spark of reluctant understanding. For his colleagues, you will educate yourselves on strategy and professional growth before seeking shortcuts. No more judgment without experience. And you will approach collaboration as equals, not subordinates. Murmurs ran through the group, and I let them simmer in that discomfort for a moment. It was necessary. Then I looked beyond the professional conditions. Growth was deeper than work. You'll also identify one habit that has been holding you back, and you'll commit to changing it. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's fear, but you'll face it head-on. I could see them exchange glances, some defensive, some thoughtful, but each had heard the truth. I added one more layer, softer but unyielding. And finally, remember this. The world doesn't stop for anyone. Those who laughed at others often lose sight of the path they're on. Use this experience as a lesson, not as an excuse, not as a regret, but as a guide. By now, the tension in the room had shifted from fear to reflection. I wasn't punishing them. I was offering an opportunity, one they would have ignored years ago. But now, with me at the helm, they had no choice but to confront the habits, attitudes, and assumptions that had limited them in the past. I could feel my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. Don't let their laughter define you. Let it push you to rise. I had risen. I had transformed humiliation into power, doubt into resilience. And now the people who once belittled me had to meet that new reality head-on, not through confrontation, but through growth. I concluded the meeting, leaving them with a sense of challenge, of responsibility, and, hopefully, a spark of humility. Compassion and firmness had guided me here. I cared, but I would not bend to the old patterns of mockery or dismissal. The power was mine, and with it came clarity, purpose, and the chance to shape not just my own future, but theirs as well. Weeks passed after that meeting, and I watched subtle changes unfold. David was quieter in his critiques, offering guidance instead of condescension. His colleagues sought my advice with genuine curiosity rather than smug expectation. The shifts were small, almost imperceptible at first, but they were real. And with each change, I felt a strange, quiet satisfaction, not revenge, but the fulfillment of having set the record straight through growth and integrity. I spent one morning alone in my office, sunlight streaming across the polished desk, my grandmother's silver bracelet catching the light. I held it in my hand, remembering the words she had whispered so many years ago. Don't let their laughter define you. Let it push you to rise. I realized that I had risen not just above their ridicule, but above the fear that had once paralyzed me. Every late night, every struggle, every small victory had led to this moment of balance, power, and grace. I reflected on my journey, from the anxious young woman fumbling through her first job to the confident leader who had turned humiliation into strength. I had learned that real success was about more than wealth or recognition. It was about the way you carried yourself, the choices you made, and the boundaries you set. I had learned to protect my peace while extending compassion, to lead without cruelty, and to command respect without arrogance. Looking at the skyline, I felt a surge of gratitude for the people and lessons that had shaped me. The clients who trusted me, the mentor who believed in me, the family and friends who offered support, they had all played a part in forging the woman I had become. And those who laughed at my first job? They had unwittingly fueled a determination I never would have found otherwise. I fastened the bracelet around my wrist again, letting its cool metal remind me of resilience, persistence, and self-respect. I knew that no matter what came next, I had the power to face it with grace, courage, and clarity. I leaned back in my chair, a soft smile forming, and whispered to myself, almost as a vow, I may have been laughed at once, but now I am unstoppable. The city hummed below, indifferent yet beautiful, a perfect backdrop for the quiet triumph of a woman who had turned every doubt into a stepping stone, and whose laughter now belonged only to her.